Morning, everybody. My name is Holly Newman. I'm the Talent Development Resource Teacher here at Albemarle High School. And this is the fourth session in a series of four in total sessions on writing the college essay. Specifically, today we're going to talk about editing the college essay and feedback, and kind of go through a checklist to think about when it comes to editing your college essays. So the first thing I want to remind everyone is that it's 100% completely normal to expect to write multiple drafts of your essay. I really have never, in 18 years of teaching 12th graders, high school students, ever seen a college essay that wasn't, that didn't go through multiple drafts. So I do think the more time you spend planning, whether that's the Jamboard exercise, the 15 objects exercise, thinking about the links between those and your values and your characteristics that you're trying to show in your college essays, the more planning that you do, the better off you'll be in terms of how many drafts you're going to need to write. In fact, I would say the students that wind up having to write the most number of drafts of their essays are students that went straight to the Common App prompts without actually thinking about what it was that they wanted to showcase about themselves before they tackled the prompts. So I'm not famous, and I'm not a college admissions counselor, but in the past 18 years, I think the best advice I've given students is to plan, to spend some time planning those essays. So if you haven't checked out my previous sessions, I definitely encourage you to check out sessions 1 and 2 on sort of introducing the college essays and jumpstarting, and some exercises to get you thinking about those. Session 3 is all about structuring the college essay. Okay, so in terms of what the revision process is going to look like, once you're done with your planning, you're going to sit down at some point and write your first draft. Between your first draft and your first revision, I always encourage that students just set the essay aside for a couple of days. So write your first draft, make some revisions right then, like we would all do, and then set it aside for at least 2 days. Because that time, that space that you give between writing the first draft and when you go to revise it for the first time, that space can really sort of clear your mind of your word structure, your sentence structure, your word choices, so that mistakes or areas that don't flow become more obvious. So give yourself some space between 1 and 2. When you go to do your official revision, probably the best advice I can give students is to read it out loud, like out loud, not out loud in your head out loud, but out loud. And actually audio record yourself reading it. And then listen to it back and make some notes about, did it flow when you heard it out loud? Did it make sense? Did it communicate what it was that you were hoping that it would communicate? And write some of those notes down and then go back in and make your revisions from there. That process of hearing an essay versus just reading it silently to ourselves is pretty incredible in terms of what it can do for revision and showing you what areas need work. 3, okay, so you're ready for feedback. Where can you go? So AHS has an awesome peer tutoring center. I don't know if they will workshop college essays, but I would guess there are a lot of seniors who are looking to workshop essays. So that might be a really good meeting place. Or you can just ask your friends for feedback. Obviously, English teachers are the obvious first thing that comes to mind, but you've got plenty of teachers who are excellent writers across all the disciplines. So if you've had teachers who are especially good writers, who struck you as being especially good at writing, then you could ask them for feedback. Family members. absolutely can give you really valid and great feedback. And then, of course, you're also welcome to email me at Albemarle High School. Once you get that feedback, of course, you're going to revise your essay again, and then hopefully it's ready to go. All right, so some questions, sort of a checklist of things to ask yourself when you're revising and editing an essay. So first, are you proud of it? Do you like this essay? Do you love this essay? Do you think this is a good reflection of who you are? Because if you're not happy with your essay, especially your personal statement, you should work on it, because this is the core essay that all these schools are going to see, whether it's Coalition or Common. Yes, you're going to write additional prompts. Yes, you're submitting resumes and scores and your course schedule. But this is the best way for a college essay admissions officer to hear your voice in a way that none of those other things can really do. And if you're not proud of your essay, it's possible that your voice and your authenticity just isn't coming through. And that can be an indication that it just needs more work. So ask yourself, first up, are you proud of it? Next, does it begin in an interesting way? So I spoke last week on structuring the college essay, on the importance of making sure that your opening sentence, your opening lines, sort of are really interesting, that really sort of grab and hook the reader. So ask yourself, if you're going through a pile of 40,000 college application essays, like UVA had 40,000 applicants last year, is this sort of an interesting start? Or did it start in sort of a bland way? Spend some time on that intro and your hook in a way that maybe you haven't spent time in the past for English essays or for history essays. You really want this essay to come out and start in an interesting way, in a captivating way. Next, ask yourself, did you write enough about the significance and the impact? Okay, the number one complaint I have heard from college admissions counselors this year is that students tell a great story and then don't relate it back to the significance or the impact or the period of growth that came as a result of that story. So did you write enough about the significance and the impact of whatever it is that you're sharing in a story or a series of stories? Did you relate it back to its impact and its significance to you and on you? Does that come through in the essay? All right, next. And you can, again, checklist this. Does this story and the paragraphs that are in it, are they connecting to your values and your characteristics that you're wanting to show? And we're really talking about like maybe 3 combined values and characteristics. You don't have a ton of space, maybe 550 to 650 words, depending on the application essay and the personal statement. But you can't go through all your values and characteristics. You're going to have to narrow them to the ones that you want to make sure that your admissions counselors have a sense of. So are you connecting them back to your values and your characteristics? Next, did you tie it to a hook? You spent all this incredible time creating this hook in your opening paragraph or sentence. If you never come back to it, then it was a bit of a waste. So you want to make sure that somewhere in the last paragraph or the last few lines, I hesitate to say conclusion because conclusions can be so mindlessly boring in English papers or history papers. So you don't want to do a boring conclusion, right? But like somewhere in that last paragraph, that last line or couple of lines, did you tie it back to your hook? Because, when I think about the essays that I really remember from students, it's the ones who sort of circle back around and leave me with that impact from start to finish. And I think that has a lot to do with how much time you spend tying it back to your hook. So don't drop the hook. And that's actually good writing practice for like English and history papers too. It's just that a lot of us don't really do that. So do that in this essay. All right, next. Does it end in a memorable way? Just as we spend some time crafting, not just writing, but like crafting your beginning, you also want to craft the ending. And you want to make sure that your essay really ends in a way that's memorable. So that can be, again, tying back to the hook, really thinking about your word choice, or thinking about, maybe the significance and the impact. You really want to sort of leave me with a ringing sense of who you are. So does it end in a memorable way? And I'm just going to talk briefly about, and this doesn't happen a ton, but it does happen. And so I don't want students to think that this never happens. Sometimes students work an essay and work at it and work at it and work at it and rewrite it. And at the end of it, they just still don't love it. And they're not super happy with it. They're not super proud of it. And it is okay to just set it aside and start your thinking again. You can start from scratch. Sometimes, not a lot, maybe 10% or fewer of students wind up, as they work with me, going, I'm just not happy with how this turned out. I want to start in a whole new direction. And that's okay. Like, it's fine. Take it in a whole new direction. If you feel yourself forcing it, forcing either the story and the values and the characteristics, it's going to ring inauthentic to your reader too. And so it's kind of like burned pizza crust. Like, you can add more sauce and cheese and toppings, but it's still not going to fix the fact that your base and your core isn't great. And your core really does need to be great. So just make sure that you love it. And don't be afraid to go back to the drawing board. It's sort of this idea of a sunk cost. If you've taken economics, you know what a sunk cost is. Sometimes we think the more time we put into it, the more value we should place upon it. And that's not always the case with writing and sort of creative writing like this. Like, all, great writers tell you, yeah, I mean, a lot of times they just set it to the side and go in a whole different direction. And sometimes the absolute best essays come out of that realization that this direction wasn't working. I just want to take it in a whole new direction. Sometimes, though, you just need to try out a different version of that essay if you're not super happy with it. So thinking about how you could tell the story from a different side or a different perspective, and to give the same story from a different side or perspective. Or maybe it's just not connecting to values and characteristics or significance. Maybe you just didn't do a good job selecting the values or the characteristics that the story is showing. And so those are some ways that you can try out just different versions of the essay. And I've had students bring me like 2 different versions of the essay and say, which one rings more authentic to you? Which one do you like better? And that's fine too. You don't want to hand me like half a dozen of the same essay, but, I think it's valid to sort of look at different perspectives, different ways of telling your story. And finally, in terms of my checklist, you want to make sure that you are open to hearing feedback. If you're not open to hearing feedback, I think, people in general, I think, want to help improve your essay, but you've got to sort of be open to hearing that and, to really sort of reflecting on your essay and what's coming across to the reader. Which can be different, I think, than what we're trying to express in our minds. So you want to make sure that you're open to hearing feedback in these areas. If somebody tells you they need more information, okay, so if somebody says, I'm not getting a sense of, what actually happened in the story, or I need more details. Okay, so definitely take that critique seriously. If they're asking for more information, it's an indication that maybe you didn't communicate what you were trying to get it to communicate, and you may need more detail and specifics. So that's more information. On the flip side, TMI, too much information. Are there areas that just are overly laden with details that aren't really relevant to who you are, your values, your characteristics that could come out? That's good feedback to take in. Are there areas that are just dragging in the story? Too much information is also something that a third party can be really quick to pick up on. So take that seriously. I think third parties also do a really good job figuring out if a story links to your significance well in a way that we don't do as well, because our minds make it really obvious because we're the writer. But somebody who's reading it as a third party, we have a much easier time saying, I don't see the link between the significance and or your story. I'm just not seeing the link. So take that advice seriously and well and work through that. Finally, I think third parties do a pretty good job telling you when the flow is choppy or if it's just not sort of flowing. That's not to say that you can't be creative in how you're expressing your essay. And sometimes choppy can be good and be sort of the point, but that should sort of ring out as part of the voice. So I would take that feedback seriously as well. If somebody's saying it just doesn't flow very well, take that seriously. Third, is it you? Like, just ask them, after you read this, do you feel like you could find this essay in a pile of 40,000 essays? And no, it was mine, assuming that they had time to read 40,000 essays. But if this is friends or family or, people that know you well, the fact that they could find yours in a pile of 40,000 essays is significant. And so that's a good question to ask somebody who is reading your essay. Finally, take seriously matters of clarity. If something is clear or unclear, ask the person who's doing the feedback for you, who's giving you feedback, is it clear? What areas are clear? What areas are unclear? And that can give you some meaningful feedback. So with that said, be open to hearing feedback. It's a little early, sorry. But don't let somebody completely rewrite your essay. So you want to make sure that the words that you choose are your words. Okay. It's fine to use a thesaurus, but pick words that you would actually use out of the thesaurus. Don't pick words that you've never heard of or have not really used in your vocabulary, because remember, this is supposed to be about your voice, right? And if you're letting somebody else choose the words or a thesaurus choose the words, then your voice is not going to come through. And that's 100% what this essay is supposed to be about. So don't use big words just for the sake of using big words. And don't let somebody else choose your words. They can give you feedback on your words, but hopefully, ultimately, the word choice is yours. You want to make sure these stories are yours, because this is not an essay about, anything other than you and what's been significant and impactful to you. So you want to make sure that these are stories that you remember, that resonate with you, that may be different than like what a family member, especially like their stories and their perspective. What they remember is going to be different than you. And so if you switch and tell a story that, was your mom's or whatever, that again, your voice is not going to come through as well on that, because it's somebody else's sort of story and recollection. And finally, make sure that these are really and truly the values and characteristics that you feel like you want to showcase, because they are really authentically who you are. Don't try to write to somebody else's values or characteristics. Don't try to write what you think a college admissions counselor wants to hear. You want to just showcase who you are authentically. What are your values? What are your characteristics that you're trying to show? All right, and finally, as sort of a last checklist to go through, What makes up a good college essay? So these are things that I look for when I come in as a third party to read your essays. First, I ask myself, what are your core values? Can I tell what your core values are at the end of this essay? And where in this essay are you showing and illustrating these values? So you didn't just tell me your core values, you also showed me your core values. So I look for that. This essay is showing vulnerability. You don't need to be writing Disney essays in real life. Things are gritty and people are vulnerable, and that's what impacts us, right? Is the grit and the vulnerability and the mistakes, right? Don't feel like you have to be and present this perfect person where everything sort of ends up like the happy Disney ending in the end, or this needs to be like, I call it the Instagram essay, because that's all I ever see on Instagram, are like people's perfect pictures. So ask somebody that's reading your essay, what did you learn about me that you didn't already know? Is there a sense of grit and vulnerability in this essay that shines through? Because it's that grit and that self-reflection that help us to grow. And I think colleges like to see that, level of reflection in students. I can't imagine reading nothing but perfect Disney essays all day. That would be really boring. And I'm quite sure the ones that are interesting are the ones that show a little bit of grit and vulnerability. So consider that. Significance. So I think it's important when you finish your essay to ask yourself, so what? Ask the people that are reading this essay, so what? Why was the story significant to your future college life? Again, do not ignore the importance that these stories are playing in terms of relating it back to the significance and even thinking about your future college life. How does this story significant to the progress that you're going to make in the future? You're applying to college. So college admissions counselors want to see stories that I think can somehow link or connect to your future, because that shows that you're sort of considering those things. And I think that this grit piece and the significant piece are really linked in an important way. All right, finally, is it well written? You need to make sure that there's a reason why every paragraph and every sentence and every word is there. It all needs to be necessary. So I don't know about you all, but when I used to, not so much anymore, but in high school, when I was writing essays and there was a word count involved, I would find myself adding sort of fluff, extra toppings into an essay just to make a word count. And that is not what you want to do. You want to make sure that every sentence and every paragraph and every word is significant and not fluff, but actually really valuable to your essay, that you really sort of need that information. These are short essays. And so you should definitely take up the space in a way that's really, really valuable. And this is not a place to add fluff, because I think the fluff can feel inauthentic and not be a good reflection of your voice. It's just us trying to make a word count. I hope some of you do this. It's not just me. So, as you go through, make sure that you feel like every paragraph and sentence and word choice has and adds value. Okay, and that's it. You're welcome to reach out. My email is hnewman@k12albemarle.org if you have any questions or if you want to meet. And I thank you all for stopping by.